History is filled with stories of great discovery, powerful empire, and remarkable achievement. Through book, letter, and archaeological discovery, we have been able to learn a great deal about how people lived in the past. Many events are carefully recorded, allowing historians to understand what happened and why. But not every story in history had a clear ending. There are moments when people, ships, or entire groups suddenly disappear, leaving behind all the questions. Sometimes the evidence confusing. In other cases, there are almost no clues at all. These mysterious disappearances have fascinated historians and researchers for generations. When cities are destroyed by natural disaster or war, the physical evidence often remains. Building collapse, artifacts are buried, and written record help explain what took place. Over time, archaeologists can reconstruct the story with reasonable accuracy. But when people simply vanish, the situation becomes far more difficult to understand. In many of these cases, investigators find only small details, an abandoned ship, an empty settlement, or a campsite left behind in the wilderness. These fragments of evidence raise more questions than answers. What's caused people to live certainly? Did they encounter unexpected danger? Did they attempt to escape something? Or did circumstance solely force them to abandon their home and journey? Over time, stories about these disappearance often grow larger and more mysterious. Some explanations are based on careful historical research and scientific evidence. Others are theories that develop through rumor, legend, and speculation. Separating fact from myth can be challenging. However, even when the full truth remains unknown, historians continue studying the evidence that survive. Old journals, ship logs, archaeological discoveries, and historical documents can all provide clues about what might have happened. Each new discovery helps researchers better understand the events surrounding these mysteries. What makes this disappearance especially intriguing is that many of them involve ordinary people who suddenly found themselves in extraordinary situations. Explorers traveling into unknown territory sometimes vanished without sending word back home. Ships crossing vast oceans were occasionally discovered drifting with no crew aboard. Small settlements were sometimes abandoned, leaving behind buildings and belongings but no clear explanation. These events remind us that life in earlier centuries often involved significant risks. Travel across ocean was dangerous. Exploring remote environments mean facing unfamiliar landscape, unpredictable weather, and limited resource. Even building a new community in a distant land could bring an unexpected challenge. For the people living during those times, survival often depended on factors that were difficult to control. In this video, we will explore several mysterious disappearances in history. Some of these events all involve famous expeditions that enter unknown reason and never return. Others involve ships discovered under strange circumstances with crew who seem to vanish without warning. There are also cases where entire communities were suddenly deserted, leaving behind clues that historians still attempt to interpret today. By examining the historical evidence, we can learn not only about the mystery themselves, but also about the condition people faced during this period. Even when the final answer remains uncertain, this story provides valuable insight to exploration, travel, and life in the past. They also remind us that history is not always a complete record. Sometimes pieces of the story are missing, leaving behind puzzles that continue to capture our curiosity. So let's take a closer look at some of the most intriguing disappearances in history. Even when people vanished, journey ended without explanation, and mystery remains that historians are still trying to understand today. 1. The lost colony of Rock-On. In the late 16th century, England was eager to expand its influence to establish settlement in the New World, hoping to gain access to new land, resource, and trade route. Among these attempts was a small colony established on Broken Island, located along the coast of what is now called North Carolina in the United States. In the 1587, a group of English settlers arrived on the island with the goal of building a permanent community. Unlike earlier expeditions that focused mainly on exploration or military outposts, this colony was intended to become a true settlement where family could live and grow. The group includes more than 100 peoples, among them were men, women, and children who hoped to build a new life in this unfamiliar land. Leading the colony was John White, an artist explorer who had previously visited the region during earlier English expeditions. White was chosen as the governor of the new settlement and was responsible for helping the colonists establish themselves. At first, the settlers began constructing homes and repairing the land for farming. However, life in the new colony quickly proved to be far more difficult than many had expected. The environment was unfamiliar, and the settler has limited supply. Growing enough food to support the community became a constant challenge. The relationship with local Native American group was so complicated. While some interactions were peaceful, others were tense. The settler depends on cooperation with local community in order to learn how to survive in the region. Before long, it became clear that colony need additional supply from England. Recognizing the seriousness of the situation, John White agreed to return to England to gather more food, tools, and equipment. The plan was simple. He would organize a supply mission and return to Raccoon as quickly as possible. However, events in Europe soon disrupted the plan. At the time, England was facing growing tension with Spain. Military preparations were underway as the threat of conflict increased. Many ships were being used for defense, and transatlantic voyages became more difficult to arrange. Because of this situation, John White was unable to return to colony immediately. What was supposed to be a short trip turned into a long delay. Years passed before White could finally organize a return voyage to Raccoon. When they eventually arrived back at the island in 1590, he hoped to reunite the settler and bring the money supply they had been waiting for. But when he reached colony, what he found was deeply unsettling. The entire settlement had disappeared. The house that had once built by the colonists were no longer standing in the same condition. Some structure had been carefully taken apart, suggesting that the settler may have intentionally dismantled them. But there were no people anywhere on the island. There were no sign of battle, no burning building, and no obvious evidence of violence. Instead, the colony simply appeared abandoned. John White and the sailor began searching the area for clues. Eventually, they discovered one small piece of evidence carved into a wooden spot with the word croissant. This word referred to a nearby island and also a Native American group known to live in that region. White had previously discussed a plan with the colonists. If they need to leave the settlement, they would carve the name of their destination somewhere visible so that they could find them when he returned. because of these masses. While believe that Saturn may have a recollect to question island, we didn't know today at the Hatteras Island. Unfortunately, bad weather prevent one from sailing to the island to search for missing colonists. A powerful storm forced the chef to leave area before the full investigation could take place. As a result, the governor ran to discover what had truly happened to the people who had left behind. Over the century, the mystery of the Raccoon colony had fascinated historians and researchers. Several possible explanations have been proposed. One theory suggests that the colonists joined nearby Native American communities in order to survive. Living alongside local group may have provided food, shelter, and the knowledge needed to adapt the environment. Another possibility is that the settle attempt to move island or relocate another area but face unexpected difficulty along the way. Archaeologists have spent many years studying the region, searching for evidence that might reveal where the colonists went. Artifacts from the late 1500s have been discovered in some nearby areas, suggesting that at least a few settlers may have lived among local communities. However, no single discovery had fully solved the mystery. The disappearance of Raccoon Colony remains one of the most famous unsolved stories from early American history. It reminds us how uncertain life could be during the age of exploration. Traveling across the ocean to an unfamiliar land requires courage, but it also carries enormous risk. Limited supply and unfamiliar environment and difficult relationship with local group all make survival challenging for early settlers. In the case of Raccoon, a small community simply vanished from history, leaving behind on a single calf would have as a clue. More than 4 centuries later, historians are still searching for the final answer. And the mystery of what truly happened to the lost colony of Raccoon continues to capture the imagination of people around the world. To the Mary Celeste, a ship fell without its crew. In the late 19th century, the world ocean were busy with merchant ships carrying fruit between continents. These vessels transport valuable cargo across long distance, connecting ports in Europe, North America, Africa, and beyond. For sailors, light at sea were both challenging and dangerous. Storm, navigation error, and mechanical problems could quickly turn a routine voyage into a serious emergency. Yet even in the time when maritime travel carried many risks, one event stood out as especially strange. It involved a ship called Mary Celeste, a merchant vessel that would later become one of the most famous maritime mysteries in history. The Mary Celeste began its final voyage in November 1872. The ship departed from New York Harbor carrying a cargo industrial alcohol that was being transported to Europe. On board were 10 people, including the ship captain, Benjamin Brick, his wife, their young daughter, and several experienced crew members. Captain Brick was known as a skilled and responsible sailor. The voyage itself was expected to be routine, and there was no reason to suspect that anything unusual would occur. After leaving New York, the ship sailed east across the Atlantic Ocean. For several weeks, everything appeared normal. However, about a month later, another ship sailing in the Atlantic spot, the Mary Celeste, drifting across the water. The vessel was moving slowly and irregularly, which suggests that no one was actively controlling it. The ship that discovered it, called the Dei Gratia, approached carefully. When sailors from Dei Gratia boarded the vessel, they made a discovery that quickly turned the situation into a mystery. The Mary Celeste was completely empty. There was no crew member anywhere on board. At first, the investigator checked the ship for signs of damage. Surprisingly, the vessel was still in good condition. It was fully seaworthy and still capable of sailing. The cargo was largely untouched, and there were plenty of supply remaining. Food and water was still available. Personal belonging, clothing, and manual navigation still remained on the ship. In fact, many details suggest that the crew had left the vessel suddenly and unexpectedly. One important clue was the ship lifeboat was missing. This indicates that the captain and crew may have abandoned the vessel intentionally, but the reason why they would do so remained unclear. Normally, a crew would only abandon the ship if it was sinking or severely damaged. In the case of Mary Celeste, neither of those conditions appear to be present. The ship was still floating safely when it got discovered. Investigators also examined the caption logbook. The last record entry suggests that the voyage had been proceeding normally just day before the ship was found. There were no clear warning of danger of sign that something had gone wrong. As news of the abandoned ship spread, many theories had begun to appear. One possibility that was the crew believed the ship about to explode. Because the cargo included large quantities of alcohol, some historians believe that foam may have built up inside the ship's storage area. If the captain feared an explosion, they might have ordered the crew to temporarily leave the vessel in a lifeboat when they wait for the danger to pass. However, if they became separated from the ship by strong wind or wave, they might not have been able to return. Another theory suggests that rough weather may have caused damage that made crew think the ship was no longer safe. At sea, even the experienced sailor sometimes had to make difficult decisions based on limited information. A sudden storm or unusual movement of cargo might have convinced that the crew abandoning ship was the safest choice. Unfortunately, if they entered the lifeboat and drifted too far away, they may have been unable to return. There are also more imaginative explanations that have appeared once a year, including stories of piracy or other unusual events. However, historians generally focus on explanations that are supported by evidence from the ship itself. Despite careful investigation, the true reason that crew left the Mary Salad had never been fully confirmed. The ship was eventually brought safely to port, but the fate of the captain, his family, and the crew remain unknown. What makes the story so fascinating is the condition in which the ship was found. Only many maritime disasters or earthquake clearly show that what happened. The Mary Celeste appeared calm and almost ordinary, except for the fact that every person on board had disappeared. More than a century later, the mystery still attracts historians, writers, and researchers who continue studying the evidence. The story of Mary Celeste reminds us how unpredictable life at sea could be during the age of sailing ships. Even experienced crew traveling on well-built vessels sometimes face situations history had never been fully explained. And in this case, a perfectly good ship was left drifting around the Atlantic Ocean, carrying only silent and unanswered questions. 3. The Franklin Expedition, a journey that never returned. During the 19th century, one of the greatest goals of European explorers was to discover a sea route through the Arctic that connected the Atlantic Ocean to the Pacific Ocean. This route, known as the Northwest Passage, promised to shorten travel between Europe and Asia and open a new opportunity for trade. For many years, explorers attempted to navigate the icy water of the northern Canada, but the harsh environment made the journey extremely difficult. In the 1845, A British naval officer named Sir John Franklin was chosen to lead one of the most ambitious expeditions ever organized to find the passage. The expedition includes two ships, the HMS Erebus and the HMS Terror. Both vessels were strong ships designed to handle cold conditions. They were also equipped with new technology for the time, including steam powered engines that could assist the ship while flying with grit. In total, 129 officers and sailors joined the expedition. When the ship departed from England in May 1845, there was a great sense of optimism. The expedition carried enough supply to last several years, including freezer food, tools, and equipment needed to survive in the Arctic. Many people believe that this journey might finally solve the long-standing mystery of the Northwest Passage. At first, the voyage seemed to proceed normally. The ship stopped in the Greenland to take on additional supply before continuing north into the Arctic waters. This was the last time European sailors saw the expedition alive. After that point, the ship disappeared into the vast icy region of the Canadian Arctic. Months passed, and then years, without any news about the Franklin and his crew. Eventually, concern began to grow in Britain. When the expedition failed to return, the British government organized several search missions to find out what happened. These search teams traveled through dangerous Arctic conditions, exploring coastline and frozen sea in the hope of finding survival of clues. Over time, small pieces of evidence began to appear. In 1855, a third party discovered a written note left behind by members of the expedition. The message had been placed inside a metal container and hidden beneath a pile of stone. The note revealed that two ships had been trapped in ice near King William Island in 1846. For nearly 2 years, the ship had remained frozen in place, unable to move. Eventually, the situation became too difficult for the crew to survive aboard the vessel. The note explained that the remaining men had decided to abandon the ship and attempt to travel south on foot. By the time, Sir John Franklin himself had already died. The surviving crew member hoped they could reach trading posts or settlements far to the south where they might find help. Unfortunately, the Arctic environment was one of the more challenging places on Earth. The cold temperature, frozen terrain, and lack of food made the travel extremely dangerous. Later search expeditions discovered scattered equipment, small campsites, and other treasure left behind the crew during the final journey. This discovery suggests that the men struggled to survive as they moved across the icy landscape. Over the years, researchers and historians have continued studying the Franklin expedition to better understand what happened during its final months. Modern scientific study of preserved remains artifacts have provided additional clues. For example, researchers discovered that some of the food supply carried by the ship may have been contaminated with lead from the metal can use to store them. Long-term exposure to lead can cause serious health problems, which may have weakened the crew during the difficult journey. In addition, the harsh Arctic condition could have made survival extremely difficult, even for well-paid explorers. Despite all the research, many details of the expedition's final day remain uncertain. For more than a century, the exact location of the lost ship was also unknown. Then, in the 21st century, the new discovery finally revealed where the vessel had been. In 2040, the wreck of the HMS Erebus was discovered in the Arctic water near the King William Island. 2 years later, in the 2016, explorers also located the wreck of the HMS Terror. These discoveries were major breakthroughs for historians and archaeologists. The ship, preserved in the cold Arctic water, still contained many objects from the expedition. Researchers continue studying these sites in order to learn more about what happened to the crew. The story of Franklin expedition remains one of the most dramatic exploration mystery in history. It represents both ambition and the danger of exploring unknown regions during the 19th century. For the man who sailed into Arctic in 1845, the journey was meant to be a historic achievement. Instead, it became a tragic reminder of how powerful and unforgiving the natural world can be. Even today, the Franklin expedition continues to capture imagination of historian and explorer, offering both answer and new questions about one of history's most mysterious journey.